Good morning and welcome to the MAP Talk on Farm to School programs in Southern Arizona. I'm Jennifer Bullen, the Making Action Possible or MAP Dashboard Coordinator and a research economist in the Economic and Business Research Center at the University of Arizona. I'm joined by George Hammond, the Director of the Economic and Business Research Center. We're going to spend just a few minutes discussing the details of the MAP Talk and then turn it over to Dari Duvall, one of the authors of the white paper on farm to school programs in Southern Arizona, to take you through that paper. So a little bit of the details. The MAP talks are recorded. They will be published on the MAP website this afternoon. We encourage you to share them with those others that you feel may be interested in this topic. You can find them in the library section of the MAP dashboard and also on the homepage of the website for the next few weeks. We will have everyone muted during the presentation except for the presenter. At the end of the presentation, we will unmute everyone and there will be a 5 to 10 minute question and answer session, at which time you can ask questions. Also, you're welcome to email me questions at any time during the presentation. My email address is there at the bottom of the slide, jpullen@eller.arizona.edu. You can send me questions and I can ask the authors those questions during that question and answer session. As many of you know, the MAP dashboard is a partnership between the University of Arizona, the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona, Pima Association of Governments, the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, and Sun Corridor. We also have several community sponsors: Tucson Electric Power, the Thomas R. Brown Foundation, and the Freeport-McMoran Foundation. Without their continued support of this project, it would not be possible, so we would like to thank them for all of the efforts that they put into the MAP dashboard. I also would like to give a shout out to the MAP dashboard. Last year we won an International Impact Award from the Community Indicators Consortium. This is an international organization that features indicator projects. We won this Impact Award for our demonstrated ability to drive positive change in Southern Arizona. You can learn more about this award on the MAP website. I'd also like to mention that we have 2 monthly features in the Arizona Daily Star. We have a health feature that is published on the front page of the health section the first Monday of each month, and a business feature that is published on the front page of the business section the last Sunday of each month. Look for those. This month's business feature, which is coming up this coming Sunday, is on job growth and what that means for Tucson. I'd also like to mention all of the feature articles that we publish on the MAP dashboard. We write 2 feature articles each month. These are either written in-house by researchers at the Economic and Business Research Center, or they include white papers like you're going to hear about today. We cover a wide variety of topics. Recent topics have included rental affordability, Arizona's role in border trade, what increases in home prices mean for the Tucson region, and also how much has your community improved. These community papers are at the city level, so you can compare how the city of Tucson does to the Tanque Verde region or the Catalina Foothills or Marana, Oro Valley, Sarita, Green Valley, and so on, different communities in Southern Arizona. So we encourage you to go to the library section of the MAP dashboard. This is where all of our feature articles are archived, and check out all of those different articles that we've written over the last few years. And then finally, I encourage you to engage with us. I know many of you probably heard about this MAP Talk from our newsletter, but we send out a monthly newsletter. So if you're not a subscriber, I encourage you to sign up. You can go to the website, scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, sign up there. We just send out 1 monthly newsletter, keeps you up to date on events, on new articles that are out, and new data updates. Also, if you're ever on the website and you have a question about the content, about the data, please feel free to use the Ask a Researcher form and submit your questions, and one of the researchers within the center will respond to you in a timely manner. So now, for what we're all here for today, is a discussion on the white paper Farm to School programs in Southern Arizona. One of the authors, Dari Duvall, an economic impact analyst with the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at the University of Arizona, is going to take us through that presentation now. So I'm going to turn it over to her. George, you should be able to pull up your screen now. So just a moment while George pulls up his screen. There we go.
Great, thank you so much, Jennifer, for the introduction, and George, thank you to the EBRC for having us here today. I'd like to start off by acknowledging my teammates, Ashley Bickle and George Friswold, who were a part of this research as well. And with that, I'll get started. So a quick overview of the topics we're going to cover today. We'll start by taking a look at the local foods movement and define a few themes around that, as well as farm to school programs, what they consist of, what they look like. We'll have an overview of the study, and then we'll start digging into the data on farm to school programs in Southern Arizona. Followed by that, we will discuss some key concepts for the economics of local foods. And then we'll use the Southern Arizona region as a case study for exploring what those economic impacts can look like. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some takeaways and key questions. So local foods, very generally, are source identified. They originate within a certain proximity to the people that consume them, and they retain information on where, by whom, and very often how a food was produced. So for example, if they were produced organically, sustainably, so on and so forth. Benefits that are commonly cited of local foods is that there is often a shorter supply chain from the farm to the consumer, which can result in greater freshness and quality of the produce and a reduced environmental footprint due to shorter transportation. Local foods can support regional producers, particularly in rural areas, opening up new market opportunities for them. And finally, greater consumer awareness and engagement with food and the food supply chain can lead to improved nutritional outcomes. There are a number of types of local food programs taking place, one of which is farm to school programs, which is what we're going to be looking at today. So farm to school programs are a three-pronged strategy, and some farm to school programs include all three of these components. Some include one or two, but those three components are, first of all, local food procurement by school food authorities for school meals and snacks, integration of nutrition education into the school curriculum, and finally, development of school garden programs. And I wanted to preface this presentation today by saying that this analysis is only looking at the procurement component of school food programs and their short-term economic impacts. So we're not looking at any impacts on nutrition, health, or educational outcomes of students. And so for those municipalities, school districts, community organizations that are looking to start a local food program or a farm to school program with the stated goal of promoting economic development, it's important to consider some of the things that we're looking at today. So, local food procurement. As mentioned before, it can open up market opportunities for local agricultural producers. It can result in short-term economic effects, so things that happen immediately within the school year versus longer-term impacts. It's also easier to study than nutritional or educational outcomes. In those cases, one might have to follow those students later into their education or their life to see the outcomes. This we can actually look at as it's happening and understand what that looks like. And part of the reason we're able to do that is due to the USDA Farm to School Census, which is a systematically collected data source on school local food efforts. And this is generally an area that lacks good, consistent data across the country. So this is an excellent opportunity for us to dig into the topic. So the Farm to School Census, it tracks farm to school activity throughout the nation. And the first Farm to School Census occurred in 2013. And then they repeated it in 2015 to see any progress that had been made since that initial benchmarking. So we'll rely on that 2015 Farm to School Census data for this analysis. It's a national census of school food authorities. That can mean a number of things. In the case of a school district, that would be the central food purchasing operation, the food services of the whole district. In the case of charter schools, it might be an individual school. So the procurement data that the Farm to School Census collects includes procurement of local foods, total food spending, commonly purchased local food items, and benefits and challenges of conducting farm to school programs, as well as other school food activities, but it's focused primarily on the procurement component. So in this study, we're examining the potential economic impacts of local food purchases through farm to school programs in the Southern Arizona context. As mentioned, we're relying on the 2015 USDA Farm to School Census data, and for purposes of this study, we're defining Southern Arizona as Pima, Santa Cruz, Cochise, and Yuma counties. So jumping into the data from the Farm to School Census, this table presents an overview of the respondents in the 4 counties. So there were a total of 44 respondents to the Farm to School Census out of 151 potential respondents. And the share of county students represented by those responding school food authorities ranged from around 37% all the way to 87% in Yuma County. So the status of these various programs, 11 respondents indicated that yes, they do currently conduct farm to school activities. 1 indicated that they did not, but that they had plans to start in the next school year. 10 stated that they currently did not, but they have plans to start in the future. And 22 indicated that they do not currently conduct farm to school activities and they had no future plans. So of those 22 respondents that did not have future plans, this chart might be a little bit hard to see, but these are the main barriers to farm to school programs as cited by Southern Arizona school food authorities, the top ones being that it's difficult to find year-round availability of key food items. It's hard to find new suppliers, growers, or distributors. Local producers aren't bidding on these food opportunities. It's hard to get information about product availability, and local items are not available through their primary vendors. Going back to those schools that do have local food procurement, there are 2 general ways to buy food for the schools. You can buy it directly from the producers, or you can buy it indirectly. So a total of 4 of the 10 Southern Arizona farm to school respondents with local food procurement purchased directly from producers. 3 of those bought directly from food processors and manufacturers, 2 through community-supported agriculture CSA models, and 1 directly from an individual producer, such as a farmer or rancher. More common, however, was using indirect buying channels, and this represents sort of the more traditional model of using a food distributor for the sourcing of school food. 6 respondents indicated that they used distributors. 5 used USDA foods, 4 used the Department of Defense Fresh Produce Program, and we'll get into those, the details of those programs shortly. And then 1 reported using a food buying cooperative. So all in all, 9 of the 10 respondents reported purchasing through intermediaries. The Department of Defense Fresh Produce Program is a federal program that provides up to 20% funding to schools, and that represents a share of their USDA entitlement funds for purchasing fresh produce. And within their catalog, items that are from in-state are designated as local. So it's important to note that their definition of local is food that's produced within the same state. Within the 2013-2014 school year, Arizona participants in the DoD program spent 11%, or $501,000, of their program funding on foods that were designated as local. Statewide, the top fresh produce items that were purchased included lettuce, celery, broccoli, cauliflower, and vegetable soup mix. Within the 4 southern Arizona counties, they spent 9% of their program funding, or $82,000, on local and state foods. So how do we define local? Well, this really varies a lot. Farm to School census respondents report on what their program considers to be local food. And the most common response was food that's produced within the same state. Second to that was produced within the same city or county, and there was one respondent that considers it within a 200-mile radius. When we look at this in terms of spending by definition, it's even more heavily weighted towards those programs that consider in-state as local. So looking at the local food items most commonly procured by farm to school programs, we see that this reflects a lot of the production, agricultural production within the state of Arizona. So it includes vegetables, fruit, and milk. And the most frequently served local food item is in fact milk, followed by vegetables and fruits. And it's important to note the case of milk. Milk is actually a product that is very commonly sourced from nearby because it's highly perishable and it's difficult to transport. So we'll get into this more in depth later in the webinar, but milk is an important case to consider when we're looking at the economic impacts. So to the left here, of the 10 respondents, we don't provide the school district names, but this shows the different shares that milk represents of the total local food purchases by these school food authorities. And as you can see, it's really across the board, all the way from 0 to 100%. To the right, we have some descriptive statistics of total food expenditures and local food expenditures. On average, total food expenditures for the school food authorities was over $360,000, and that ranged from a minimum of $12,000 to $1.3 million in that school year. Food expenditures on local food, including milk, averaged $113,000, or 26% of school food expenditures. Excluding milk, however, we can see that that's a lot lower. It averaged $70,550 in that school year, or 9.9% of food costs. So what are some key considerations for evaluating the economic impacts of local food programs? Well, here we have a bit of a dramatization, but under the most simplistic assumptions, we say that a school wants to purchase local food, therefore they send their money to the farmer produces the food, the school gets their food, the farmer gets their money, the community sees the benefit of that spending. It's a win-win-win situation, and everyone is happy. Well, that's not necessarily the case. It's not always quite that simple. So what are some common assumptions implicit in the stated economic benefits of local foods? Well, oftentimes it's assumed that there are no resource constraints. There's no land or water restrictions that limit expansion of agricultural production. Second, there's no opportunity cost of spending. So a school, if it has that dollar, it can only spend that dollar once. It can't spend it on local food and non-local food. So it's sort of assuming that there's no negative effect of shifting spending from one buying channel to the other. And so we know that these two assumptions don't hold in southern Arizona. Water and irrigated acreage are constrained in much of southern Arizona. We have the active management areas to control groundwater pumping and irrigation non-expansion areas. And we also know that there is in fact an opportunity cost of spending that can impact regional distributors that schools are currently using to source their food. And just to illustrate the point about the acreage, here we have a graph of total cropland in southern Arizona between 1997 and 2012. And there's some slight fluctuations from year to year, but generally it's remained relatively constant, and in fact has seen a slight decline over that time. So there are in fact resource constraints binding us when we look at local foods. So what are a few of these factors that influence the economic effects? Import substitution is one, and I'll be defining these shortly. Countervailing effects, how we define local, and the counterfactual. So import substitution is the concept of, by replacing goods that we import from outside the region by goods that are produced within the region, we can benefit the local economy. And this is the primary driver of the positive economic impacts of local foods. To the right, we have an illustration of the food dollar, with the non-local food dollar on the left and the local food dollar on the right. And we can see that for the non-local food dollar, a share of that food dollar goes to the local distributor that's delivering the food to the school or to the grocery store. However, since that actual food item is imported from outside the region, that represents leakage of that money out of the regional economy. On the other hand, for local food, if that food item is purchased directly from the producer, that whole food dollar stays within the regional economy. So import substitution implies an increase in local production to offset the imports. And as mentioned, it leads to that greater share of the consumer's food dollar staying within the local economy, thereby supporting jobs, wages, and economic activity. Countervailing effects. This means accounting for any reductions in economic activity that could result from shifting spending from a non-local food purchase to a local food purchase. So talking about only being able to spend that dollar once, if there is an intermediary such as a food distributor involved in providing food to the school, if the school shifts that spending to a local producer, that local distributor might not be getting that business anymore. Additionally, the various food chain actors, how they respond to the local food demand can affect whether or not it has a positive economic impact. So if the farm does not expand their production, it may not necessarily have a positive economic impact. If an intermediary is shifting their spending or their production from one customer to another, that might negate any potential positive impact. As mentioned before, resource constraints represent a countervailing effect. Is the producer shifting production from, say, a field crop such as alfalfa to fruits and vegetables to meet that demand? In that case, there would be a negative economic impact accompanying the positive one. Export substitution is an idea that purchasing a locally produced food that otherwise would have been exported out of the local area, by doing that, there's really a net zero economic effect, because that purchase, that food would have been purchased regardless, but it's just a matter of who's purchasing it. And then finally, the definition of local. In doing these analyses, the scope of the program and analysis should match. So if we're looking at a program at the county level, we don't want to be counting statewide effects. We want to limit it to the area that we're concerned with. Finally, the counterfactual. So we have to ask ourselves, in the absence of the local food program or the farm to school program, where would the food have come from? So that takes us back to the example of milk, which is most commonly sourced from nearby. Another example are specialty crops that have few alternatives. So different areas specialize in certain crops, such as potatoes in Idaho, apples in Washington, and in the case of Arizona, romaine lettuce. Sometimes there are few options outside of those areas. So what can the program take credit for? And so we wanted to provide this example of lettuce in Arizona. Between December and March, Arizona supplies over 80% of the nation's lettuce, and that can reach as high as 90% in some weeks. We also saw from the DoD Fresh Produce Program's data that 41% of the spending on local foods was on lettuce. And to the right, we have lettuce production by regions. Arizona is in the solid green line. Here we overlay that weekly shipment of lettuce from Arizona with the school year for 2014-2015. And we can see that Arizona's lettuce production, those times of the year when it's supplying most of the country with lettuce, also are the times when schools are in session. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves, would these schools already be getting that lettuce from Arizona regardless of the local food program? So just to summarize this section, countervailing effects, the opportunity cost of spending by the schools, switching or crowding out of customers for distributors and farmers. Crop shifting is the farmer shifting production from field crops to vegetable crops in order to meet the demand. Is there export substitution? Are local buyers crowding out out of state or out of region buyers? And then what's being purchased, and does that include inherently local foods such as milk or specialty crops? So to the case study, what are the potential economic impacts of farm to school activity in southern Arizona? So there's a lot of information on this slide, but basically we're taking the average spending on local foods by the Southern Arizona School Food Authorities, and we're modeling that in different ways. So in the first case, it's the most simplistic set of assumptions. We're simply modeling that as an increase in local agricultural production of broccoli and spinach. In the second case, however, we want to start considering some of these countervailing effects. In this case, we're introducing resource constraints. So if land and water are constrained, that means the producer needs to switch production from a different crop to grow food crops for the school. So we'll model the spending of $70,000 on fruits and vegetables with an accompanying decrease in alfalfa production. Finally, in the third case, we modeled both resource constraints and the opportunity cost of spending. So we additionally introduced the decrease in local wholesale activity. And with that, we can see here the results. So this analysis, we used what's called the IMPLAN model, which models multiplier effects of shocks to a local economy. In case one, that $70,550 of spending on local foods, including the multiplier effects, has a total economic impact in terms of sales of $90,800. So those are those ripple effects that occur through the economy as businesses have additional business activity. Once we introduce resource constraints, however, the total economic impact is lower, and we can see that the net direct sales impact is less than the initial $70,550, and that's due to that decrease in alfalfa production. Finally, in the third case, introducing both resource constraints and the opportunity cost of spending, there is an even greater decrease. So the total economic impact to the region would be $47,400. Now, some of you looking at this might think, oh, well, are local foods actually hurting the local economy? That's not the case. So we have to take into consideration, again, the counterfactual. So if the school were simply spending their money on non-local foods through a local distributor, what would that look like? Well, the wholesale activity, that wholesale margin that's realized within the local economy is around $12,000. And with multiplier effects, it would be in the range of $13,000. So we can see that this local food compared to the alternative of spending on non-local food does in fact have a positive economic impact. However, by not accounting for those resource constraints and opportunity costs, you could potentially overstate that impact significantly. So takeaways and important questions. As just discussed, economic impacts of local foods can be overstated if countervailing effects are not accounted for. This is important in southern Arizona, where water constraints imply trade-offs for producers, for municipalities, for farmers. Intermediaries present a challenge for estimating impact. So the actions of a distributor of a food hub, depending on what they're doing to meet the demand, could potentially negate any positive impacts. Therefore, programs need to track what they're doing and integrate that data into their assessments of the impacts. But despite these countervailing effects, positive economic impacts are possible through local food programs. So some key questions for people that are interested in pursuing a local food program or a farm to school program. Is the local food purchaser increasing their spending or shifting their spending from non-local to local foods? Is local spending on something usually sourced from nearby, such as milk, or as we saw in this case of Arizona, lettuce? Is the local food producer expanding their operation to meet demand, or are they simply selling existing production to a different local buyer? If the scale of production isn't increasing, are producers changing what they produce to meet demand? In other words, are they crop shifting to meet the demand? If purchases take place through intermediaries, such as a distributor or a food hub, is the purchase causing them to expand their operation locally or not? And does the definition of local for all parties involved match? So in terms of demonstrating economic impacts for a program, an important question is how you can collect the data on the actions of the food chain actors, including the growers, final buyers, and any intermediaries, if applicable. And so with that, we'll take questions.
Dari, thanks so much for that excellent presentation. It's also a really great piece of research. I highly recommend that those of you who want to take a few minutes and learn more about this, that white paper is a really great way to get a feel for it. So, by the way, this is George Hammond, Director of the Economic and Business Research Center. I'm here with Dari. So I will kick off the question answer period with a quick question for Dari. I thought you had a couple graphs there that were really fantastic with the seasonality in lettuce activity, lettuce purchases, I think, lettuce shipments maybe.
Yeah.
That was really great, and how it kind of coincides with the school year. And I wonder if these farm to school programs are having an impact on, are they exacerbating price cycles, making, increasing demand at a time when demand is already high for Arizona's lettuce? Are you seeing any of those kinds of impacts?
I haven't dug into the specifics of that just yet, but the total value of lettuce produced in Arizona, what the schools are purchasing, is very small compared to that total. So I don't expect that it would be affecting price. However, we do know that local food often sells for a premium within a region, and it's an opportunity for producers to sell their goods at a higher price. And so that is a potential effect that local food programs could see. However, there is not data at the current time on the effects of those price effects at schools. So,
okay, great, thank you. Do we have any questions from the general audience at this time?
Hi, this is Jennifer Pullen. If there's no other questions from those joining us today, I have a question for you, Dari, and that is there any data on the longevity of farm to school programs? And really I'm wondering is if it's common for them to be discontinued after a few years, and if so, does that discontinuation normally occur because of the resource constraints, or are there other reasons for the discontinuation of programs?
I'm not aware of any data that looks at that, and because of the timing of the two farm to school censuses, they're only 2 years apart. I don't know how useful they would be in assessing something like that, and I don't know about any plans to repeat it or when that would occur. So unfortunately, I'm not aware of any data on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Hi, this is Alicia Kim. I had a question about, school menus are made well in advance. And so is there any data or any kind of qualitative data that shows that schools may be adjusting their menus to adjust to, growing seasons to make more farm-to-school purchases?
Yeah, so farm-to-school programs, that is one of the things that are being done at the state level to help encourage schools to participate. That is a major barrier for schools, is they do plan their menus months in advance, and therefore if the items that they have planned within their menu aren't available, and often they're not because at the regional or local level, goods can be very seasonal. So there are resources out there for schools to help them integrate the local seasonality into their menu to help assure that what the meals that they're planning for, that they'll be able to find the ingredients that they need locally.
Okay, great. Last question. Anybody have a final question for Dari? Okay, well, hearing none, I want to thank again Dari for an excellent presentation and a great piece of research. I also want to thank all of you for attending today's webinar on behalf of the MAP dashboard. Dari, Jennifer, and I, and the University of Arizona, we wish you a great day. We will talk to you soon at the next MAP dashboard webinar. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.